Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
Dun, 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 dun,
Da
dun,
da da
dun,
da
dun,
da
dun,
da da
dun,
da
dun,
da da
dun,
da
dun,
da
dun,
da
dun,
da.
dun. I want to go for a run and have a kindly stranger toss me an orange.
I want to eat 12 eggs in one sitting,
Okay.
not cooked.
I almost did that today. Well, they were cooked. But anyways.
Jesus. I
By
can
the way,
honestly say.
wait. Before we get into it. So Burt Young's novel was called Endings.
Okay.
He apparently also wrote 2 screenplays
Wow. I did
and
not
2
know that.
stage plays.
Did any of them actually get made?
Apparently they were filmed.
Oh.
I don't know what they were called, though. I'm just reading this thing on his Wikipedia page.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Burt Young.
He was also a painter. So, like, you know what, man? The guy could play a scumbag, but he was a very talented man.
We're talking about the first Rocky movie from 1976, the OG, and that was your Burt Young catch-up from the primer episode. This is the deep dive episode where we're going to talk spoiler full momentarily. So if you've never seen Rocky, you need to see this movie, and you should probably listen to the primer episode because it's a really fun conversation that's spoiler free about it.
Yep. I mean, as spoiler-free as you can be for a movie that is 48 years old.
Yeah, it's wild, eh?
Yeah, crazy.
And Sylvester Stallone doesn't look a day over 55.
Yeah, really. For a guy who's been punched in the face his whole life, he looks pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually, you know what? I don't know if I've ever said this. I've said this a lot, but I don't know that I've ever said this on this podcast specifically. If I had a time machine, first thing I would do is go back to like 1979 and watch Star Wars in theaters.
Mhm.
Then I would go back and watch Rocky in theaters.
Yeah, I think this is in the conversation for one of the greatest blockbusters of cinematic history.
Yeah, for sure, right? And just, I mean, I think I've heard stories anecdotally about people just losing their shit in the theaters.
Oh my god, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
If they ever show this at the Highland, we should go check it out actually, because this would be cool to see in a crowded theater.
Yeah, for sure.
I
Absolutely.
I saw The Shining earlier this year in a crowded theater, and it was like easily one of the top 5 best theater experiences I've ever had.
Oh, yeah. No, I'd be down for sure.
Yeah, I'll pay attention, and we'll see if they ever show Rocky. Probably on the 50th anniversary they will.
Yeah, so we got 2 more years.
Yeah.
That's okay. We'll
That's-
both be
that
30.
gives us enough time to watch all of the rest of the Rocky movies in the
Yeah,
series.
exactly, and talk about all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, so we have quite a bit to talk about for
Oh
this
my god, we
movie.
have too much to talk about in this
Should
movie.
we start with Polly?
I have no idea where to start in this movie, so if you want to start with Paulie and continue the Burt Young tangent, it's all you.
Yeah, so I had kind of forgotten about Polly, and I had kind of forgotten about Polly, you know, Rocky's shitty friend, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. Let me just ask you this: did you like Polly?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. I think that Paulie is pretty integral to the film. Like, I think that, you know, he is everything. Rocky is everything that he isn't, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And like, it's funny because like Paulie isn't content with his place in life, and Paulie is always scheming and trying to like improve himself, but he's always doing it to the detriment of other people. And I think that this is something, again, that while I was thinking about it in a more critical sense and trying to analyze this movie, I thought that the arc that of Paulie and Rocky's relationship is really interesting because
Kind of, yeah.
he starts off like he's a friend of Rocky who, you know, Rocky's obviously interested in his sister. Rocky's constantly trying to make advances with her, but he's super awkward. She's super awkward.
It's awkward.
Yeah. And so Paulie, in a sense, kind of tries to get Rocky's foot in the door and tries to, like, you know, he's in a weird way, he's like a really good friend about introducing his sister to Rocky.
Kind of, but in like kind of a it's funny, there's that scene where he, you know, he's gonna bring Rocky over for Thanksgiving dinner so he can have more FaceTime with his sister. And there's that really funny scene. By the way, sidebar, I forgot how funny this movie was.
Yeah.
It has some great singers. But anyways, so there's that great scene where Rocky and Polly are heading over to his place. And Rocky, I think he says 4 times, you sure you told your sister I was coming, right?
Right.
He's just like, yeah, whatever. Then she shows up, he shows up, and she's quite flabbergasted, and he gets really he basically bullies her into going on a date with him.
Yeah.
You know, what does he say? He's like, I'm sick of I'm sick of you hanging out here like a spider. Go on, enjoy your life. And then she's like, I got a turkey in the oven. He grabs the turkey in the oven and throws it into the alley.
Well, and something that's in this scene that this is the first time I ever even noticed this is in the background of this scene. There's actually a picture of Polly in the Army or the Navy.
Oh, that went over my head.
Yeah, and I think that's something to maybe pay attention to if you've never noticed that in the movie. And like I said, this is the first time that I noticed this myself. And I think that its inclusion in the scene is so interesting to me because it does kind of, without explaining to you, it gives you a little bit of an idea of maybe some of the background history of this character
and the anger problems.
Yeah,
maybe?
like, you know, he probably served, like, this movie takes place in 1975. 10 years ago, he would have been probably in his mid-20s, because I think he's the older sister of...
Older brother.
Yeah, sorry, the older brother.
It's okay.
Of Adrian, and so, you know, that probably puts him around, like, mid-20s during the Vietnam War, so he probably did serve in Vietnam. He's probably, you know, like a vet who's come back and who, you know, a lot of the 70s explores the return of the vets and their relationship with America and the people who, the popular war who stayed home.
Yeah, and like, so I mean, Polly's super shitty in that scene, but like he also... I don't know if Adrian would have ever been brave enough to go out with Rocky if he hadn't, like, essentially, like, browbeat her into going.
Right.
You know? Which is weird. It's kind of like, okay. And then, jumping forward a bit, there was one scene that, like, so I haven't seen this movie in 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there was one scene where as soon as the scene started, I started getting anxious.
Yes.
And, like, squirming in my seat because I was like a trauma response. I'm like, oh, right, it's this scene. And it's like, so there's this whole subplot where Rocky is working for this guy named Gazzo, who's like a shitty loan shark.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that he's that shitty. It's more like Rocky.
He's like a second-tier loan shark.
Yeah, right? So Polly is working at this meat factory, you know, working in the cold and in those conditions, keeps like swelling the joints in his hands, we're told. So Polly keeps saying to Rocky, like, you're put in a good word for me with Gazzo, right? Put in a good word for me with Gazzo, right?
Yeah.
And Rocky keeps kind of blowing him off or saying, oh, you know, a couple times he's like, like, forget about Gazzo, right?
Right.
And, you know, Polly keeps saying, like, I'd be a good enforcer. Like, I know all about bones.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, interesting. So anyway, it's like, I think it's around Christmas, or it might even be Christmas, but like Adrian and Rocky are kind of cuddled up and like they're kind of talking, and Rocky basically just says, he's like, basically just admits, he's like, I forget exactly what he says. Basically like, I'm not going to put in a good word for him with Gazzo. Like, what does he think he knows about that? Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Polly overhears this and just loses his fucking shit, and he grabs a baseball bat and he starts like smashing shit and saying like, you know,
yeah, threatening Rocky, threatening his sister.
Yeah, and just saying like, you know, I don't like blah 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 blah. And then my favorite part of that scene is when he's screaming at his sister, he says, it's your fault I never got married because I had to take care of you.
Right.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's why you never got married, big guy. But
yeah,
Adrian, to her credit, like screams back at him and says like, you know, you say you were good to me, I was good to you, I cook for you, I clean for you, I pick up your dirty clothes, like blah blah, I've always been good to you, blah blah blah. And then, you know, to top it all off, which is probably the most horrifying moment in the movie, he screams at her, he's like, you're busted, you ain't a virgin no more, you're not gonna get married or something.
Right.
At that point I was like, okay, Rocky, like knock his head off.
Well, and actually, to go back a half step, I think that you brought up a good point that Adrian has some character development in this scene and over the course of the movie, and that's something that I think the first Rocky movie in particular does really well, and that it shows multiple characters in this movie having a character arc and like becoming better people throughout this movie.
They're just these big, difficult, emotional scenes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then Adrian storms off, and like Rocky like comes over and kind of grabs Polly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like this moment where you're like, okay, is he gonna kill him? And then Rocky just kind of walks off, says nothing, and then him and Adrian decide to move in together.
Yeah. And so there's so much to digest about everything you just said, honestly. And like, I'm going to reference a couple things, and then I think we'll even have to just come back to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like the elements of Rocky and, you know, okay, big picture that we haven't even talked about at all yet is the fact that these characters live in a very impoverished part of Philadelphia. This isn't a movie about characters who are, being kicked down by the man, and it's like it's solely focused on the man, and it's like, corporations are ruining these people's lives. And it's also not a movie about like characters who are highly intelligent, who just somehow, or highly attractive, who just somehow like are in these weird situations, and they're just like so much smarter and so much better than the situations that they find themselves in, kind of thing, right? I think that's something that more and more movies do, is shows like characters who are almost unbelievable. Like Mary Sue's are one example of this in films.
Characters who are just very, very special.
Yeah. And I think that this movie is so interested in two characters who are, I think, honestly, like probably either on the spectrum, or like Rocky's been beaten up a few times in the head. Like he references that he's maybe not the most intelligent person in this movie a few times. Like there's references to Adrian's like mental capabilities and stuff like that in this film. And I think that is part of why this movie is so endearing and is so...
I get what you're saying. I don't know that I would go that far, but I get your point that it's showing like realistic characters in like realistically shitty circumstances, right?
Yeah.
Like there's that old joke about how like, if you watch Friends, they complain about not having any money and they're living in like this this gigantic apartment.
Yeah, like multi-million-dollar apartment.
Yeah, or like, I think there's a similar joke about Pretty Woman, which I've never seen, but just going back to the scene in particular, like the thing that kind of threw me about it is that it's a really harrowing, really emotional scene.
Right.
And then Adrian and Rocky decide to move in together. Then we cut to Rocky training in the gym, and like the referee or the doctor or somebody comes and takes a look at him. Rocky kind of walks off. He's just throwing some punches at the bag. And then Paulie just shows up. He's like, "Hey, can I talk to you?" Mm-hmm. And Rocky's like, "Yeah, go talk to me." And I'm like, "Okay, Paulie's going to apologize, right?" And then Paulie's just like, "Hey, like, I know a lot about advertising, maybe we could blah, 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 blah."
Okay, so this is a good tangent, because I'm on the same page with you. I didn't know that you and I were going to end up in the same place here, because I was kind of alluding to like Rocky's intelligence and the references points throughout this movie, and you've come full circle to where I was going.
Okay.
I think that this is something that, again, is built into the bones of this movie, is like Rocky is maybe not the most intelligent person in the room, in every room that he's in.
Yes.
And I think that, one of the better scenes of this movie as well, one of the more memorable scenes, is when they show the news report and the first like introduction of Rocky and Creed and the fight and everything, and the cheap shots against Rocky, and like him not being, him being a nobody basically, and like, they're...
Oh, you're talking about like the press conference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so then Rocky, like, he admits that he's a little shaken up by it to Adrian later in the film. And then the thing that I kind of want to bring back to Paulie here is, I think Paulie for a long time is trying to take advantage of Rocky in this movie, and Rocky can recognize that. And I think that's part of like the most fascinating part of Rocky and Paulie's relationship, is Rocky sees that and sees that Paulie's trying to take advantage of him, and that like genuinely hurts him, like, because I think that Rocky does consider Paulie to be one of his best friends.
Well, and I mean, especially if you have knowledge of the series, like they're like to quote TV tropes, they're heterosexual life partners.
Yeah.
Even when Rocky gets like catapulted into stardom, he fucking takes Paulie with him the whole way.
Yeah.
Even at the end, like even later on when he loses his fortune and he's operating a restaurant, him and Paulie are still best friends.
Yeah, and like, so to kind of bring this all full circle, it's that moment when Paulie comes to him and says, "Hey, Rocky, like, I want to make money off of you, and I kind of understand advertising, and are you okay with me going out there and, doing this on my own and trying to make a buck off of you?" And Rocky says yes at that point.
Rocky's like, "Yeah, go for it."
And that's, I think, again, speaks to all of the buildup of all of the movie beforehand. Everything that we've skipped by to talk about Paulie that we have to come back to.
Right.
Is for the first time in Rocky and Paulie's relationship, they're on the same level. Like Rocky and Paulie are on the same level. Paulie is being upfront and honest with Rocky about his intentions here, and that's when their bond is kind of reformed.
Yeah, I don't know that I fully agree, but I see where you're coming from. To me, it threw me because I was like, we just had this really harrowing scene, and then Paulie shows up. He's like, "Hey, I want to make money off of you." Like, okay, like where's the big apology, big guy? But
that is the apology. It's the like, I recognize that you're not a dummy, and I'm being honest with my intentions. And that's all Rocky wants, is to be seen as an
well,
equal.
I mean, Rocky's so dismissive in that moment. Well, maybe not dismissive, but he's basically, I think the actual quote is like, "Oh, you want to make some money off this? Like, go ahead, make some money off this."
Yeah, but
you
I
know?
kind of read this as like accepting of like who Paulie is and who he is, and like each of them kind of sees each other for who they are, and they kind of form that understanding between the two of them.
I suppose I did. One thing I did for this is jumping ahead. One thing I totally forgot is, during the ending when Rocky's screaming for Adrian and like blah blah blah, I had totally forgot that Paulie kind of gets into it with a security guard, and they start arguing. And while they're arguing, Paulie reaches behind him and lifts the rope for his sister.
That's a fantastic little moment.
Yeah, I was like, oh shit! Like Paulie did something nice for somebody.
Yeah, for sure.
And I will admit, he puts on the robe and it has like the Shamrock Meat logo on the back, and Mickey has that great line where he's like, "Trained you to be a fighter, not a billboard." And Rocky's just like, "Oh, hey, my friend gets 3 grand, did I get the robe?" Rocky's like, "It's a fair trade."
Yeah.
So that was pretty funny.
Again, that goes back to like Rocky with somebody not trying to take advantage of him. Like the Rocky and Paulie are on the same page. Rocky knows what each of them is getting out of the transaction. Whereas like Rocky feels like in the first like interview with Paulo that he's being taken advantage of, and that's something that kind of comes up several times.
There is also the famous meat locker scene where Paulie basically is like, "Yeah, I got a news reporter in there. They're gonna take a shot of you, like punching the bags."
Yep.
And Rocky's kind of like, he's kind of like, "You didn't tell me this," like blah 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 blah.
Right.
I will admit, I actually did want to talk about that. So Paulie has essentially, I guess Paulie really is his manager. He's called this news reporter because he wants to get footage of Rocky punching the meat.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think I mentioned this before. One thing that always throws me in movies is like when I don't believe a friendship.
Right.
Like if these two characters, it's kind of like, it's natural for like best friends in movies to like rip on each other and shit on each other.
Yep.
But like if there's no genuine affection there, I'm always like, why are these guys friends?
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe they're friends, right?
Yep.
There is one, watching this movie again, I did have a couple moments where I'm like, why does Rocky put up with this guy? But then they're standing outside the meat locker. Paulie's kind of like, "Yeah, come on, go. Like, hit the bags. We're going to get footage of you. It'll be fun."
Yep.
And Rocky's kind of like, "Come on, man. This is embarrassing." But then he kind of like smiles. He's like, "I'm going to kill you, man." He's like, "This is embarrassing." And they kind of like jostle each other. I'm like, okay, I believe it.
Yeah.
Like, I believe they're friends.
Yeah,
for
sure.
There's something here. I believe it now.
And it's a friendship, like, we don't know the back history of how long they've been friends for, but it's also like a friendship of convenience. Like, they're two people who are both in these unfortunate circumstances that they're in,
they're both kind of misfits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what this movie ultimately is about as well, is a bunch of misfits kind of getting their moment.
Yeah, but again, it's such a small moment, but I really like that moment with outside the meat locker where Rocky's kind of like, what am I going to do with you, Paulie?
Yeah.
We've all had friends like that.
Yeah.
I might be a friend like that to you, but anyways.
I want to talk...
I've never tricked you into an interview yet.
Yeah. I want to talk about the first act of this movie and how great of a screenplay this is, in that it does such an effective job at painting Rocky as like this empathetic, like good-natured person. And
I mean, the first 30 minutes, it's just watching this poor guy get shit on.
Yeah. But
like,
if you think about it, like, there's aspects of this movie that I think if you were to try this again, or with a worse actor or a worse script, it wouldn't work. Because Rocky is an enforcer for a loan shark. Like, he breaks legs for a living. And that doesn't kind of dissuade you on Rocky as a person.
Well, there is that great scene where he has to break a guy's thumb because he's short $70, and Rocky just can't do it.
Yeah.
And then there's that scene with Gazzo where, they talk, and Rocky's basically just kind of like, well, I just got to figuring that, like, if I broke his thumb, he'd get laid off, and then he can't pay you back. And then Gazzo's like, well, you let me do the figuring from now on. Like, people are going to think I'm running a charity case here.
Right. And, you know, like there's moments like that. There's, like you said before in the primer episode, the him coming back from the fight and talking to the turtles, and that scene kind of going on for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And there's everything in the first act in relation to him and Adrian and them in the pet shop. And, you know, Rocky in a different performance, Rocky comes off as real creepy in this scene. And and in a modern watch, Rocky can come off as creepy in the scene.
Yeah.
But
So yeah.
but I think that it kind of also works to a degree in this film.
Well, I have to admit, like, Rocky's entire courtship strategy is twice a day he goes to the pet shop and tells her a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to give Rocky credit. We see him come up with a joke on the fly. And I was like, all right.
Yeah.
And just, you know, I remember just, you know, if I flirt with a woman and I'm not getting 10 out of 10 positive, like, signals, I instantly run away. But,
Right.
like, this guy, I'm like, he's getting nothing from her and he just keeps taking shots.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you're right. It did kind of make me squirm a little in 2024. But
almost more in like this guy just has no social skills kind of way.
no, like cringe.
Yeah. And not necessarily in like the creepy way. And I think that this movie toes the line very, very, very closely.
There
at
are
times.
a couple moments where you see Talia Shire, Adrian, shooting him like fleeting glances, and you're kind of like, okay, like,
yeah, maybe there's
right.
something here. And
Maybe
like,
she's into it.
but and this is the other part of this movie in the opening act that does a really good job of painting the portrait of this setting that we're in. Like, I don't know that there's another movie that I really feel like we're in the dirty part of a city and like in the worst
impoverished Philadelphia.
Yeah, like it really is like, you know, very almost without hope in this area of town.
It's like, you know, we just talked in The Talented Mr. Ripley about how you and I both grew up like in the suburbs, middle class, but like this is dark. Like,
Yeah.
it's dirty.
Yeah.
You know? Like, you know, you've got a bunch of people crowding around a burning barrel during Rocky's walk home, and I'm just like, yep, it's one of these movies.
Yeah.
So it's one of these neighborhoods.
And all of this just, again, does a really effective job at making you sympathize with the characters while also understanding who they are.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily, like, I don't give Rocky a pass for being an enforcer necessarily, but I also can understand how a person in this circumstance could go down that route.
Well, there's that great moment during his date with Adrian where she says, "Why do you fight?" And he just goes, "Hey, because I can't sing a dance."
Yeah.
You know, and he shares that moment where he think it's his dad who told him, like, his dad told him he was dumb, so he better become a fighter.
And Adrian's mom kind of, she shares the same thing. She's like,
her mom told her she didn't have much of a body, so she better get brainy.
Yeah.
You know? I did find it funny. That's the first, he shares that, and then she shares that. And then that's the first time they like actually click together, right? I was watching it like, aw, they're trauma bonding. That's so sweet. Yeah. I do want to say, just in terms of the maybe how this movie's aged, that scene where he takes her up to his apartment did come across. Maybe it does.
That doesn't fly in 2024.
It doesn't fly in 2024, right? Like, you know, like she's very much like, oh, I can't, like, I shouldn't go up there. He's like, oh, come on, like, blah, 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 blah. And then he, like, you know, he's on the couch. She's like, hey, like, why don't you come sit over here and get comfortable with me? And then she's like, can I use your phone? She's like, I should call my brother and let him know where you are. He's like, oh, you want to call Polly? I can do that. And he just opens the door. He's like, yo, Polly, I got your sister here. And then, you know, the scene does end with them making out and presumably beginning a relationship. But it is very much like, she says she wants to leave numerous times.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Then, like, there's a moment even when he's basically barring her from opening the door and has his hand on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, like he's doing the hand thing.
Yeah, he's like stopping her from moving. Like, and that's a little tough to watch in 2024. And you're right, like, it ultimately something good comes of it, but the ends probably don't justify the means here.
It comes across very
forceful.
R-wordy, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like you could have cut that scene entirely and wouldn't have lost anything.
Yeah.
I do want to point out, it's really funny to me that we always see Rocky wearing his like his like 70s hipster outfit, you know, like the leather jacket and
Yeah.
the fucking tipped fedora and like
Yeah.
it's funny though, as soon as he enters a relationship with Adrian, the next scene he's in, he's wearing like a cute sweater.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, wow, she domesticated him already. Like, you know, good for you, Adrian. But you know, okay, yeah, that scene doesn't fly so well anymore for good reason. But like I do want to say, like, I actually really bought the relationship between these two.
Yes.
There's something like pure and innocent about their love.
Yeah,
You know what
and,
I mean?
and I think part of that is who these characters are, right? Like I said, Rocky's clearly not the smartest guy in the room,
But he's so sweet.
but he's so sweet. And
Yeah.
Adrian is obviously either like on the spectrum or like so brutally introverted that
I
like,
would say she's just painfully shy because after she enters a relationship, she starts dressing more confidently,
Mhm.
acting more confidently.
yeah, she might just be like incredibly introverted.
Yeah, and it's funny. So once they move in together, we see them sleeping in separate beds, and I was a little like, is Rocky the wait till marriage kind of guy? You know?
Probably.
Yeah, and I mean,
Actually, no, Adrian more so. And this is the 70s.
yeah, I don't know. There's even that scene where like Adrian kind of gives him some pecks on the cheeks, and he's kind of like, not right now, not right now. And then he like walks over to her. He's like, hey, I'm sorry. And she's like, it's okay. And I'm like, yeah, like he's a good boy. He's a good guy. Like he's boyfriend material, you know?
Yeah.
I would date Rocky.
Yeah.
I would like that to be known. I also love that they did the classic, like all we have to do is take her glasses off and suddenly she's hot. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
that's a funny trope.
Yeah, and I'm like, maybe this was one of the first, right? Yeah. But,
Absolutely no way. That probably harkens back to like
the
some
30s or
30s
something.
40s.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, yeah. I feel like we're just jumping from character to character here, but it's a character movie, so whatever.
Yep.
I have a lot to say about Apollo.
Yes, let's talk about Apollo because I said in the primer episode that I actually really enjoy Apollo. I think like even though he's the antagonist of the film, like I wouldn't say that I'm actively cheering for him to lose necessarily, but
it
like
is so satisfying watching him get humbled.
yes, it is
Yeah.
satisfying watching him get humbled, but I never am like curses this man. Like
yeah,
he's
what an
just
asshole.
evil.
Yeah.
Like in a way, I actually respect Apollo because he is actually even more than a boxer. He is a really good businessman.
Oh yeah, he's a brilliant self-promoter.
Yes.
The whole idea of like, let's just pick a random Philly boy. That's his idea.
Yep.
Like, you know, there's that great line where his manager, Irwin or whatever his name is, he's like, that sounds very American. And Apollo's like, no, it's very smart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just even like he cares about business first to his detriment. Like when
to his detriment.
yeah, like when his trainer is watching Rocky's scene
Beating
where
the
he's in
shit out of
meat.
raw meat.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
tenderizing meat with his bare hands.
Yeah, and his trainer's like, hey, like you should maybe take this guy seriously because this guy's taking you very, very seriously in this fight very, very seriously.
Right, and then I love it. So it's Tony Duke, like Apollo's trainer, who shows up at other movies. He's watching this on TV, and he's like, he squirms.
Yeah.
Like, he recognizes Rocky for the threat that he is.
Right.
And he goes, like, hey, man, this guy looks like he means business. And Apollo, there's that great shot where, like, the camera pans back, and we see the TV, like, kind of centered, but it pans back, and we see Apollo with his team in the other room. And he goes, I mean business, too. And he's like, Shirley, we got any more of that coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say that Tony is maybe one of the most underrated aspects of this movie? I think his performance is fantastic, and I'm glad that he got to portray the role in more movies after this.
Dude, when he shows up as Rocky's trainer in Rocky Balboa,
Yep.
like the 6th movie, I was like, yes.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Like I'm so happy that he kind of managed to kind of, you know, build off
he
of this.
became a bigger and bigger character, right?
Yeah.
That's actually might be one of my favorite scenes in the movie when like the trainer, like again, you can see his skin crawling when he's watching Rocky like punch the raw meat, right?
Yep.
And he's just like, hey, you know, like, and then again during the fight when things are not going Apollo's way, Tony is very quickly like, hey, he doesn't know it's a sideshow. He thinks it's a damn fight. And he's like, get out there and end this.
Yeah.
And he even calls Apollo out. He's like, stop toying with him. Just end this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's a really good coach.
And then God, I mean, Apollo showing up and he's got his like Uncle Sam outfit on. He's doing the I want you. Oh, and even before that, you see his like the endorsements he does where he's like, hey kids, stay in school, use your brain, don't be a fighter, become a doctor or lawyer, carry a leather briefcase,
Right.
be a thinker, not a stinker.
Yeah, but I like him though. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
genuinely like this character.
He's so charismatic.
Yeah.
Right? Like and then again he enters the ring, he's in his Uncle Sam outfit and everything, and he's like, I want you, I want you, I want you. Like even Rocky is just kind of standing there like, huh.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about Carl Weathers that is very charismatic. And in every role that he's in, you're like, and that's part of the reason why you're like, "Oh my god, there's Carl Weathers." Is
Yeah.
because you're just excited to see him and what he's going to do with each role that he's in.
Yeah. And then again, like I think one of my favorite moments is in the first round when like Apollo's just punching Rocky. Rocky just keeps blocking punches with his face.
Right.
And then like finally there's that crazy moment where Rocky basically lands a single hook and he knocks Apollo on his face.
Yes.
And it's like, holy shit. Like, even watching this movie last night, I almost like shot out of my seat. I was like, yes.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a really big moment.
yeah. Yeah.
And I think that, it's this is tough to talk about this movie because now I want to talk about this and kind of go off on another tangent. But the other part of the structure of this movie that I am endlessly fascinated in is how great this movie does in kind of pulling you through the emotions that it wants to make you feel. Because in the first act of this movie, you don't believe in Rocky, and Rocky doesn't believe in himself. And, you think that Rocky is going to get absolutely destroyed by Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
And and Rocky, like he's so doesn't believe in himself, and then these other characters start to show like that they believe in Rocky.
Yeah, his profile gets raised, right?
Yeah, and
even Gazzo, the loan shark's just like, hey, here's $500, take your lady
I love
out.
that.
Yeah.
I love that moment too. That like he even like is like believes in Rocky a little bit, right?
Right.
And then the second act is all about like Rocky, and I think that for people who have struggled with like imposter syndrome or something like that, I think that's part of the reason why I connect with this story arc so much is because like I've had that before, and it's like okay, like like not believing yourself, and then like as everybody kind of coalesces around Rocky, like he begins to believe in himself, and then you see him in training, and there's the great training montage, and like you're like, oh my god, like maybe he's gonna do it, and that's how you're starting to feel, and like you can see Rocky like starting to believe in himself. And then I think this is low key maybe the best scene or best like moment in the entire movie is when Rocky, and this wasn't even meant to happen in the movie, and that's what I love about this movie that we're going to talk in the effects and filming, is when he goes the night before and sees the arena and everything set up, and there's the big image of Rocky, and Rocky looks at it and goes like, these aren't my shorts.
Yeah.
And the promoter just blows him off. He's like, whatever, nobody's going to notice kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like that moment is so critical to this entire movie because Rocky completely deflates in that moment because Rocky realizes again that he's nobody and that the promoter doesn't care about him and this fight is nothing, and like he'll get this fight and sure he'll have 15 minutes of fame, but he's probably going to lose, and in the end, is any of this going to matter? And it's like all of this imposter syndrome comes flowing back in this moment, and as the viewer, like, you kind of realize in that moment, you're like,
dude, you're fucked.
How does Rocky ever beat this guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, like, yes, we've just been shown in the last, like, the second act of this movie that Rocky, maybe he can pull it off, maybe he can do it, but then the reality of this situation just, like, smashes you over the head in this one scene.
Yeah, well, it's actually more realistic than like it's more realistic than the alternative, right? It's like, yeah, dude, you've worked your ass off for 6 weeks. You're the hero of this movie. Apollo is still the heavyweight champion of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and then to kind of come back to this, like the fight, that first round when he almost knocks Creed out, like there's that moment of, like, is Rocky going to be able to go the distance? Because that's all Rocky wants. That's all Rocky needs is, like, to answer the question, can I do what nobody else has ever done? Even if I lose this, can I gain some victory out of this?
Yeah, and that's one of the great scenes. He goes back to talk to Adrian. They're, like, cuddling in bed, and he basically just decides, like, I can't beat Apollo, but I want to last 15 rounds with him, which no one has ever done.
Yeah. And even in like the first round, like when he knocks down Creed, there's the moment where the announcer says like, this has never been done before.
Yeah, nobody's ever knocked Apollo down.
And that's the moment where you're like, Rocky's already won. Like,
Kinda, yeah.
It's like this fight, everything after this, like that moment alone is going to be something that people will talk about for the rest of Apollo's career.
Yeah, remember when that guy knocked Apollo on his fucking face?
Yeah,
Like,
and actually something that you don't even notice, I think, unless you're really, really, really into boxing, is Rocky doesn't go back to his corner for the 10 count to knock Creed out immediately. And so the ref can't actually start the count until he's gone to his corner. So because Rocky doesn't go there, Creed essentially gets like extra time
to
in this
get
sec.
up. Yeah.
And if Rocky had gone to his corner, Creed would have lost the 10 seconds there, and Rocky would have won the fight then and there.
I did not notice that.
Yeah.
That would have been, wow, okay. That would have been a much less satisfying movie, but
Right.
still.
But it's something that, like, you know, there's all of that moment is just like so historic and big. And then, but Rocky has his goal in mind, and he's got his goal, and that's what he wants to achieve, right? In the fight is to go the distance. And, you know, this is why, like I said, like I thought the last act of the film, like the fight, went on longer than it did because it feels like a war.
Oh, dude, like, and again, like one of my favorite things. And again, Apollo's not like a bad guy or anything, but like it is so satisfying watching his confidence drain away, right? And realizing like, oh shit, like I actually have to work for this. And like, God, like,
and even just the way that they frame it as well, like you almost don't expect the fight to just, you know, you skip rounds kind of thing. Like you expect to see the whole fight play out, and then they skip rounds, and that's when it starts to feel like a war. Like that each round is a battle, and like these two people are going to war with each other over and over again, and like, you know, you start to see the wear and tear on their bodies over this kind of almost montage.
There's that great moment, and I like a lot has been said about this moment. Like Apollo finally knocks Rocky down, turns around, lifts his arm, he's like cheering. Then Rocky gets up, and Apollo turns around, and you just see like he just looks so tired and so shocked. He's just like, and he's got like bruises and blood on his face.
Well, and like Mickey's telling Rocky to stay down.
He's like, sit down, sit down, sit down.
Because both of them, like, you know, both of their trainers are essentially like ready to call the fight because of how much wear and tear each of them has done. But both of these characters must persevere in this moment. Like,
yeah, like even Duke says to Apollo, like, he's like, all right, you're bleeding on the inside. I'm calling the fight. And he's like, don't you dare.
And I think that's something that, you know, it also shows the character of what you need to be a fighter, or what you need to be like a professional athlete or something like that. It's this grit that most of us don't necessarily have, or necessarily have when it comes to like sports or combat.
To push yourself like beyond pain.
Yeah,
right?
And that's what these characters both exemplify. Like, and that's why I can't ever not like Apollo, is because like at the end of the day, Apollo's just as much of a fighter as Rocky is.
Oh yeah, for sure. To the point where Apollo essentially wins the fight on a technicality. Well, not on a technicality, by like split decision. Right?
Yeah, on split decision. And I think that's, you know, such an interesting way to conclude the movie is, you know, the split decision. It's almost hard to even like follow who's winning and who's losing the fight. Like the movie's almost not interested in it, and it doesn't want you to be interested in it because it doesn't matter at the end of the day because Rocky's already won.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I'm sure if I were a trained boxer, I would know that like Apollo is pretty clearly the more skilled and he gets more hits in, but like God, when Rocky gets a hit in, he really gets a hit in.
Yeah.
There were a couple, I mean, it's an almost a 50-year-old movie. There are a couple moments where I'm like, okay, that obviously looks fake. There are a couple swings Rocky takes from like, wow, like that felt like it landed.
I did. Like these two both had a lot of wear and tear on their bodies, actually.
Yeah. So I did love the scene where they make a point of saying that Rocky has never broken his nose. Mm-hmm. But then he gets his nose broken the first round, and Mickey's just like, it's an improvement.
Yeah, well, and that's something that, like, you know, that's something that kind of ebbs and flows, and it's a big theme of the movie, is that, like, Rocky, until the final fight, his heart isn't fully in the fight. And that's part of him being in an impoverished situation, right? Like, nobody's ever believed in him. Nobody's ever, you know, pushed him to another level. He's never been able to push himself because he's always found himself at the bottom of the wealth in the city or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And so like that's something that Mickey says to him at some point. We haven't even talked about Mickey in detail, but we have to come back to him at some
Well,
point.
I think that's part of the reason why part of the conflict between Mickey and Rocky is that they're kind of butting heads with each other at the beginning of the movie. And then Rocky finally says, like, I've been coming here 6 years and you've been giving me grief. Like, what's your problem? And, Mickey's finally just like, you had talent and you wasted it working for a 2-bit loan shark.
Exactly. And because Rocky, with his imposter syndrome or whatever you want to call it, like just the being a victim of circumstance, like Rocky's fitting into the role of the class that he's in. Right?
Yeah, I'd say it's less imposter syndrome and more just like the economic reality of what he's going through,
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's all well and good to say you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but like we all have to eat food at the end of the day.
And that's why this movie is like still so relatable, and like why I think this movie perseveres where a lot of other movies about somebody persevering like have come in
Failed,
bias.
yeah.
Because like this is a real person in a real situation who isn't just like a necessarily a highly intelligent, like, why are you in this position? Like, it's like, well, like it kind of makes sense. Like he's not the smartest guy in the world. He's always been in this impoverished position, and this is kind of naturally where he probably would end up, right? Like,
yeah. And then, I got to hand it to Rocky when him and Mickey have that moment. Rocky throws it back at him where he says, like, I needed your help 7 years ago, right? Yeah. But, like, here we are, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's almost like, even in that moment, it's like two generations, like, speaking to each other there. It's this generation of somebody who, at one point in time, was like a champion boxer. He's been through the ringer, he's done the fame thing, like, and all of that. And or even like, I guess Mickey says at one point that he kind of missed out on like the big
ticket,
but
because he didn't really have a manager.
Yeah, but even at that point, like, like he still was somebody at some point, and now he's got this big boxing, like, underground, like,
he's got a gym essentially.
Yeah. And this takes place in Philly, and like it feels like this is kind of one of the bigger gyms in Philly. Like there's a lot of people training under Mickey here.
Yeah, for sure. Mickey's pretty clearly like a local celebrity or something.
Yeah, and like Mickey feels like somebody who picked himself up by the bootstraps, and like he has this outlook of the world, but like most of us can't do that. Is the reality is like like and that's why Mickey's almost like failed as a coach as well up until this moment.
It really is like a scene between like a father, like a son and his estranged father. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The older generation is basically saying like, hey, come on, like you could have been somebody. And the younger generation is saying like, yeah, but I didn't have any help. Like,
yeah, like why couldn't you help
do?
Me? Yeah. And I think that's really fascinating. And that's something that, I think most people can relate to. And like and as well, like even speaking on Mickey, like the scene that you picked for the one scene where Mickey shows up at Rocky's apartment and pitches being his coach and his manager, it's such an authentic moment that these two characters share. Like they're both so raw with each other, and like Mickey essentially breaks down into tears because he's like like I had a chance and I blew it, and like you have a chance right now, and I've been here, and I can finally share with you, like
I can finally make this work, right?
Yeah, like and you've been given this opportunity, and like don't squander it, like don't blow it like I did, like let's do something here, kind of
right
thing.
And then Rocky's like throwing it back, like, hey, you only care now because you didn't give a shit about me when I didn't have this opportunity, and now you do, right?
And
like Rocky's not wrong.
Yeah.
Neither
of the characters are necessarily wrong in this situation either, right? Like because there's the moment, because like he's kind of like pitching it to him and like hyping Rocky up to himself, and then Rocky kind of throws it back in the face, like you said, and he's like, where were you 6 years ago?
Basically, right?
And that's when the reality sets in, and you kind of remember, oh yeah, like this is a little bit of a dirty ask based on what we understand of Mickey and Rocky's relationship up until this moment. But that's when, again, that's when Mickey becomes authentic, and he's like he literally cries to him while like Rocky's in the washroom, and like there's a brief moment in that scene where you already think that like this is over.
Yeah,
like,
no.
it really feels like Rocky and him are not going to be able to salvage this relationship.
Yeah, no. And then it's kind of cheesy but very touching when there's that like big wide shot and like Mickey's halfway down the street and Rocky just runs after him.
Mm-hmm.
And you see them like shaking hands and it's like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah.
Also, I want to point out, I forgot that the chicken chasing scene was not in this movie. That's in Rocky too. I kept waiting, like, when is he going to chase the chickens? And then it's like, oh.
That's so funny. I mean, this film series kind of becomes known for its, like, training montages and, like, crazy training moments. And, like, it already has one of the most iconic scenes in all of film history when he, like, gets up to the top of the stairs.
The
and
steps, and he's just, like, jamming out.
Yeah.
That was pretty... He just starts dancing on top of the steps, and it's kind of like... I can imagine the director just being like, all right, you reached the top and you're really happy about it. Go nuts. And he's just like, yeah. He just looks like the whitest dancer on every dance floor. But, but alas, it's earned. It's an earned moment.
So, I mean, the only other thing that I guess we didn't mention at the end, and I kind of said this in the primer episode, is I feel like this is one of the best third acts to a movie ever, and like even the conclusion of like it doesn't matter the results of the fight because Rocky and Adrian have found each other, and like this is the big epic like Adrian moment, right? And Rocky's won at this point, and like all of these people just want to be around Rocky, and like all of these people want in on Rocky's fame for this 1 minute, and like all of the announcers are around him and trying to ask him questions, and all he cares about in that moment is
Adrian. Yeah, it's very touching.
Yeah, because at its core, like this movie is about it's a character study. It's about these characters, and it's about these people in the worst situation you can be in, and they persevere and they come out on top, and they come out like both of them come out better people.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a feel-good movie.
Yeah, and it kind of almost breaks the mold of what a sports movie is, or what I think of a sports movie is, where, maybe it's a ragtag group of people, or it's like misfits, or whatever it is, like somebody who's washed up and getting one last chance. Like, at the end of the day, Rocky's success isn't in the fact that he wins the fight. Rocky's success is that he's finally comfortable with himself, and he's finally found somebody
that loves him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he gave Apollo the beating of a lifetime too.
Yeah. Like, he also, in that moment, becomes a legend himself.
Yeah, really. He's the guy who went 15 rounds with Creed.
And knocked him down in the first round when nobody's ever been able to do that before.
Yeah, for sure. So,
yeah.
I mean, Jesus, I really enjoyed watching this movie.
So did I. I forgot how good of a movie this is, and I feel like I say that every time I watch this movie.
Yeah, no, right? Like it's got to be in my top 10. I've got to revise my list. It's definitely in my top 10.
At some point, we got to do that. It would be really fun, but also really stressful to come up with like a top 100 list. But I don't know if it's quite in my top 10, but it's pretty up there for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, it's pretty incredible. And like, we should definitely do more of the Rocky movies.
I agree,
because I mean, holy shit, what an arc this whole franchise has.
It's wild in that, like, there are ups and downs, and there are some movies that are definitely better than others, but for the most part, the Rocky series is all like relatively enjoyable, and like it's a character that it's fun coming back to this character.
I just like that it starts off very grounded, and then it becomes kind of ridiculous, but then it swivels back around and becomes grounded again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested in watching like the Creed movies as well, because I've heard pretty good things about those.
I've seen the first Creed movie, and it's really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's really good. I haven't seen Creed 2 or Creed 3 yet, but apparently Creed 3 they're all pretty good.
Yeah, I would believe it. And that kind of brings us into the sequels, prequels, and reboots anyway. Like that, this spawned a whole franchise. I think there's 6 movies in the original Rocky. And in terms of like where this came out of, like, I don't know that we talked about this in too much detail in the primer, but we did mention that like the story of Rocky is almost as fascinating as the film itself. Like, Sylvester Stallone just absolutely broke, trying to make it in Hollywood. At one point, like, has to sell his dog because he has run out of money trying to sell the Rocky
Script. Yeah.
script. Because the other thing is like he writes this script and he tries to pitch it, but his one condition is that he gets to star in Rocky as well.
He gets to play Rocky, right?
Yeah.
And people are like, are you out of your fucking mind? Like, no way.
Yeah, because there's a lot of interest in this script, but to have an unknown in addition to, you know, a non-franchise script or whatever, like even then, you know, it's an unknown and unknown. And they ended up like being able to convince the studio to do it on a very low budget. It was like $1 million budget or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, where the actual inspiration behind this comes from, like, there's quite a bit of different discussion online about the inspiration behind this. Like, part of it is clearly like in his struggle and him writing about himself and, like, you know, not necessarily as a boxer, but using the inspiration of trying to make it big in Hollywood as like the backbone of his character.
Apparently, you know, the whole drinking raw eggs thing?
Yeah.
Apparently that's something Sylvester Stallone actually did just because he was so poor he didn't own a stove.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Holy shit. And can you imagine being that broke and like turning down a 6-figure deal for a script?
Yeah.
Like, can you like sticking to your guns that much?
And again, that just plays into like the hype of this movie, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so there is some discussion about like where Stallone was like inspired to write this, and like the obvious one is Muhammad Ali fighting Chuck Wepner. That fight occurred March 1975. Wepner at that point in time wasn't considered as like really a serious contender against Muhammad Ali, and he actually like did manage to go to the distance and almost go to the distance, and he got to like he knocked Muhammad Ali down in the 9th round. Like, it was a really one of like
a big moment. Yeah,
like one of the classic Muhammad Ali fights of all time. And it ended up like ending in like the final round with like 20 seconds left in a TKO.
Wow.
And you know, that's something that it's interesting because like that's a very clear inspiration to this, but it's also like a bit of a thorn in this movie's history because Sylvester Stallone didn't want to admit that was the inspiration of this, and Chuck Wepner wasn't necessarily happy with his story being adapted, and you know, it coming off so quickly after
Didn't
his
he
fight.
Sue every Rocky movie after this?
He did.
Wow.
And he did get some undisclosed amount outside of courts for
I mean, fair enough.
Yep. I mean, at the end of the day, though, like, I think you've said before that every story is kind of just like a rip of another story or like a rip of something that's happened in real life.
Dude,
kind
if
of
people
thing.
tell me things from real life that are interesting enough, I'll steal them.
Yeah.
I'll admit it too.
Yeah.
I'll look you in the eyes and say I stole your life story. I'll do it too.
And yeah, I mean, and in this
you
case,
can't stop me.
Nice.
I'll change just enough details that it won't hold up in court.
So effects and filming, we've talked about the script and everything. Like, he did end up, as a side note, he did end up buying his dog back immediately after getting
I've
paid.
heard the story that like he was hanging out outside a liquor store trying to sell his dog, and that was like his lowest moment. And then once he finally sold the script, he went back to the liquor store and waited for like 3 days till he found the guy.
Yeah.
And bought his dog back.
And that's actually his dog, like Butkus in the movie. Yeah, that's his actual dog. That's the dog that was sold and rebought. And he paid $15,000 to rebuy his dog.
Wow.
He sold it for like $100 or something like that.
Well, geez, that's awesome.
Yeah. So the effects and filming of this, like, what I was so fascinated by reading about this is just like how creative and like how much guerrilla filming they did. Like, this movie, the script I'm sure was incredible, but just like Sylvester Stallone is such an intelligent guy. Like, and
Oh yeah.
like, just there's so much that is improvised in this movie or like last minute changes because of circumstances in the film. Like the monologue when Rocky's like pouring his heart out to Mickey at the end of their scene at his apartment, like that's all improvised by Stallone.
Yeah, the guy can act. You know, he's kind of, people sometimes mistake him for a caricature. Same with Arnold, but like He's actually, yeah, he's a shockingly good actor.
I would say like he's more of an actor than Arnold is. And like maybe that's a little bit obvious because Arnold's a bodybuilder first
Yeah.
and then came into acting and like, you know, he played up that and he's had like some serious
I'm sure he could do a service. I'm sure, like, he can act for sure.
Yeah, he can act, but I think Stallone is definitely the better actor of the two of them. Like,
Oh, yeah. Even in, like, First Blood, like, there's that moment when he breaks down and you're like, yep, this guy's acting.
yep. Oh yeah, no, he's fantastic. And just like other scenes, like stuff that changed last minute, like when the first kiss between Rocky and Adrian in his apartment, Talia was actually sick in that scene, and so she didn't actually want to kiss Stallone because she didn't want to get him sick while they were filming this, because they filmed this in like 28 days, which is insane.
Yeah, it was a sprint.
Yeah, and so like the whole hesitation, like all of that was kind of like personal hesitation, and it kind of really worked, and so they decided to keep it. And like Sly has actually said that that's his favorite scene in the entire Rocky series.
This is the Rocky cinematic universe. Yeah.
That's his favorite moment in the whole series. And then like when they filmed the ice rink scene, it was supposed to be full of extras. It was supposed to be a public skate, and they couldn't afford to get all the extras there, so they ended up like shooting it separately, and that it becomes a much more intimate scene in that sense.
It's like, it's funny how like a lot of like restrictions can almost like enhance creativity.
Yeah, exactly. Like they shot like Rocky jogging through Philly without any like permits or anything, like no extras. Like they just threw like a camera in the back of a van and they just shot him running.
Yep.
And so like the moment where the shop owner throws him the orange was like improvised, like something like that, like somebody like, and all the, you kind of see like if you pay
People
attention,
look shocked.
Yeah,
they're
or,
turning
like,
and looking.
they're like kind of smirking because it's kind of like, oh, like what's going on
Yeah,
here?
what is
Like
all
nobody
this?
knows that they're making a movie in this scene. Like nobody knows who Sylvester Stallone is in this moment, right?
Right.
So it's really cool how that came to be, and it's just like it kind of goes to show a little bit like, yeah, they broke some rules and stuff like that to make this, but you know,
But boy, did they make it.
if you're really passionate about something, like sometimes you just have to go for it, right?
Sometimes you'll find a way, yeah.
Oh, and like I said, how important the scene where Rocky realizes that the picture doesn't have like his pants on, like he doesn't have the right color of shorts on. Like that was improvised as well, because they accidentally did make that poster with different shorts than what he had available to him to film. So they built that scene in so that they like people would like not notice it and point it out, kind of thing. Like that just became like something that was important for continuity for him to point it out. And that's actually not even the first time that in this movie where something happens and they actually like point
They just
it
write
out.
it in, yeah.
Yeah.
I do find it hilarious. I was watching this scene where like it's like the middle of the night. Rocky goes to look at the ring, and the promoter's there. I'm like, why is the promoter here? And it's like and he's in a full piece suit too. I'm like, was he just standing there, like the dead of night, smoking a cigar?
Just making sure everything's set up.
Yeah,
you know?
I guess.
Like he cares just as much as Rocky does.
Sure.
Probably more because money.
It's almost like, yeah, I don't know. It's almost like running into a teacher outside of the classroom. It's like, whoa, what are you doing here?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a one-to-one comparison, but hey, I'm sticking with it.
And then I haven't talked about Carl Weathers in the effects and filming at all, but his audition was sparring Sylvester Stallone, and so he accidentally punched Stallone in the chin, and Stallone kind of got mad at him, said like, you know, calm down, like this is only an audition. And then Carl Weathers got angry, and he was like, well, if I was actually able to like do this with a real actor, not just some stand-in, I could do better. And that's when like the director said to him like, this
All
is
right.
the actor.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and Weathers looked at Stallone for a minute and then said like, well, maybe he'll get better. And that's when Stallone was like, all right, you got the role. Because that's the personality of Apollo Creed, right?
Yeah, really.
It's like Apollo Creed is a businessman, but he's also a little bit of a dreamer, you know?
Kind of a shit talker too.
Yeah. And just like all of that is just like exactly who Apollo Creed is.
Yeah.
And why I love Apollo Creed so much.
That's amazing.
I'm like, we talked about how incredible the final fight is. Like, I again can't believe that's only 10 minutes of the film, but like they ended up like really shooting like the boxing match as realistic as they could. Like, it kind of stands out as being like one of the most authentic portrayals of boxing. Like, they were actually landing shots on each other. They actually spent like 35 hours training for that role. Like, they wrote down the fight like in detail, like I throw jab here, you punch here, like
yeah.
like punch for punch was written down because they fully scripted it out to like really come up with like a really detailed fight and make it look as real as possible.
Yeah.
Sylvester Stallone ended up bruising his ribs, and Carl Weathers, it just says that he damaged his nose, and I don't know if that means that he broke his nose or what, but something happened to him, which is funny because that's kind of the opposite to the way that things played out in the movie, but they did actually like were pretty injured in the film.
Yeah.
And actually, even to that note, like when they do the meat punching, Stallone punched the meat for so long and so hard that he actually flattened out his knuckles.
Oh.
Like, he did permanently damaged his hands. Like, his knuckles are completely flat now.
Ah. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then the ending of this movie. So, I mean, the script was rewritten a bunch of times. Like, Stallone did a lot of rewrites. I think it was like 9 times or something.
Like on the fly too.
Yeah. Well, obviously on the fly, like how much they had to like fix and everything. So apparently, like, the original idea of the fight was, well, Stallone wanted like Apollo to win the fight, and like kind of how it happens almost, but like make it a little bit more obvious. And then the director wanted it to be a little bit more ambiguous as to who won the fight. They ended up deciding like the Adrian edition actually ended up kind of being like a late addition to the film.
Right.
They actually like reshot the ending because Adrian kind of gets lost in the shuffle. Like, and you do kind of feel her lack of presence for a little bit of the film, because like during the training montage and the build up to the fight, like she does kind of get lost a little bit in the background of things.
A bit. Yeah. She never really fades. I know that like a lot of those shots of her watching the scene were pickup shots.
Yeah.
Because they recognize like, oh shit, wasn't this a love story?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's kind of why like the ending becomes like so iconic, is because it does find a way to bring it back in a way that feels authentic. The score of this movie is like iconic.
Gonna Fly Now. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think that you could probably say to anybody on the street, like, sing me the Rocky song right now, and they could probably do the theme.
Well, they might do Eye of the Tiger first, but
that is true.
this one is up there.
That's actually a really good point. Like, this film series, not only does it become known for like everything that it's known for, the fight montages, the inspirational storylines, like the epic antagonists of these films, like everything in general. The film series also has just like fantastic scores throughout, like original music written for each film, like Eye of the Tiger, like you said.
No Easy Way Out is one of my favorites from Rocky IV.
Yeah. Actually, and even on like the note of that, I forgot to mention this, that Gonna Fly Now was actually in part written by Sylvester Stallone's brother.
Frank Stallone.
Yeah, Frank Stallone.
You guessed it, Frank Stallone. Wow.
Yeah. So I think he ends up potentially performing it for like the Rocky soundtrack as well. I look back at the times. I like the movie poster of this. It's basic, but it's
effective.
Yeah, very effective. I think that this movie, the other reason why it kind of stands out is the 70s is like a way more cynical time for movies, and so this is kind of like a beacon of hope in a lot of other darker films.
Well, I think it's funny. You've mentioned many times that we're basically going through the 70s again. I've noticed there's been a pendulum shift recently where suddenly like more warm-hearted, sentimental pieces of media are suddenly being like lifted up, right? I mean, like Ted Lasso is the obvious example, right?
Yep.
Like, and I mean, even myself, right? Sometimes like sometimes I do want to feel good, right? Sometimes I want to watch a movie and be like, I actually, me and my last partner watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame back.
Yeah, that's one of your favorites, isn't it, of all time?
It is. And like, honestly, it's one of my, like, probably my best viewing experience of the year. Is just in bed with my last partner watching The Hunchback of Notre Dame being like, yeah, things are going to be okay, So
Great. And then?
And then things weren't okay. But, things are becoming okay again.
Hey, there
It's
it
the
is.
cycle. It's the lifetime cycle of okay, not okay, okay, not okay.
Yeah.
You know?
That's really what this movie's about.
Things are actually pretty great right now. I can't really complain.
Yeah, that's fair. Legacy of this movie. So Stallone ended up keeping all of his pets, like obviously he bought his dog back, but he did get to end up keeping the turtles after they finished filming.
Oh, shit. Were those actually his turtles?
Yeah, well, they weren't when they started,
But now
he
they're
ended up-
his.
They are. They're called Cuff and Link,
That's pretty
and he still has them. They're still alive.
funny. Aw.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, eh? Otherwise, this is one of the biggest like surprise hits I think of 1976. It ends up being nominated. It ends up being nominated 10 times for an Oscar.
Wow.
So I'll read off all of the nominations for you. It won 3 Oscars. This little movie that could won 3 Oscars. And I'll read them all out to you and then guess which 3 won.
Well, I already know it won Best Picture.
Yes.
So
Best Picture's won. So Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role, which is wild that they even nominated Sylvester Stallone because they don't usually do that with like first big
Imagine
roles.
being an Oscar-nominated actor straight out of the gate.
Yeah. Best Actress in a Leading Role, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Burgess Meredith, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Burt Young, so both of them competing against each other, Best Director, Best Writing Screenplay written directly for the screen, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, Best Music Original Score. It won 3 things. We already know it won Best Picture.
Okay, is it Best Screenplay?
It's not Best Screenplay.
Okay, is it Best Editing?
Yes, it's Best Editing.
And is it Best Score?
It's Best Director.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I am shocked that this didn't win an award for Best Screenplay because I think it deserves to be in the conversation for Best Screenplays ever.
By the way, I want to point out that on that podcast with his daughters that I mentioned, Stallone admitted to the whole world that he hates writing.
Really?
And I was like, really? And his
That shocks me.
Even his daughter's like, but you've written 50 screenplays.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I'm like, all right.
Stallone is just such a fascinating person.
Okay, William Goldman. Jesus.
This was actually the highest grossing movie of 1976, and it went so strong in theaters that it carried into 1977, and it was the second highest film of 1977 behind Star Wars.
Jesus Christ. What a time to be alive.
Yeah. This movie made like 11,000 times its
budget.
budget or something insane. Like when you include like advertising and everything else. Like this movie, I think if you adjust for inflation, is like well over $500 million domestic.
Wouldn't surprise me.
It's like this would have been like close to $1 billion movie if it was released today. Or
Okay.
probably a multi-billion-dollar movie. Yeah, this is like one of the most important films of all of cinema history. Like, and even like reading about like, afterwards it being included in all of these different lists and stuff. Like Roger Ebert gave this like a 4 out of 4 as soon as it came out.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
And then, over time, it's cemented itself as one of the greats of all time. Like it's 78th best screenplay of all time, voted by the Writers Guild of America. It's considered the 65th best directed film by the Directors Guild of America, 75th best edited film. Like it gets put in so many top 10 movie lists of all time. This is just an absolute classic.
Yeah, no, it is by every sense, and like an instant classic too.
Yeah,
And an enduring classic.
yes. I would be shocked if there aren't a lot of people that have seen Rocky in their lives. And if you haven't seen Rocky in your life and you're still listening, A, you crazy fool.
Yeah, you
But
suck.
B, go check this out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because personal reviews in the Partner Factory, I mean, we've already talked about it. Like, this fits into both of our top 100 lists, absolutely, like, without question.
Oh, it might even be in my top 10.
It might be in your top 10. I think this is probably closer to, like, top 30-ish for me.
Okay.
But it's, like,
I'll allow it.
I've seen a lot of movies in my life.
Yeah.
To be in the top 30 is huge.
Quite a feat.
Yeah.
I am still partnerless, but I think maybe my next date, I'll just be like, do you want to watch Rocky with me? And if she says yes, then maybe I'll just marry her on the spot.
Nice. Maybe what if she's like, that's the greatest movie of all time? I don't know anybody.
I'll get an erection.
I don't know anybody who's ever said like Rocky's like my favorite movie of all time. I gotta imagine there's people out there who like consider this the best movie of all time.
Oh, for sure.
And they wouldn't necessarily be wrong. Like, I couldn't even critique them on that.
No,
necessarily.
really. I don't think I've ever met anyone who hates Rocky.
No, neither have I. Like, just really wasn't interested in watching this last night, and that's fair, I guess. But it also is like just an absolute classic. So
It's a
she must have
banger.
had a good time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't know if I could name you a better final act of a film. Like, I really don't know if I'd have a better.
and we've said this already. I think the real strength of Rocky, one of the main strengths of Rocky, is just the character himself, right? Like
yeah.
He's shockingly likable.
And yeah, I think that's everything I want to talk about. Like, that was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. I'm glad we watched Rocky. It might make it onto my top 5 of this year.
Is this all? Yeah, because this is only the second time you've ever seen Rocky.
Yeah.
I can't believe that. I don't believe that.
Yeah, well, there's no records to prove otherwise. So, it may make it onto my top 5.
That's fair. Cool. Well, I guess we'll see. I mean, we're coming up like into the tail end of the year.
It's what is it? It's the final quarter.
Yeah,
We're the final third of the year.
Yeah, I think this probably comes out, I guess, late August, and then after that, we're into the last quarter of the year or last third of the year. And
because a quarter's 3 months, right?
Yes,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
I can do some math.
And we've got our draft coming up at some point. We still got to make draft picks for that, so
Ay.
yeah,
We're gonna be busy.
Yeah, it was fun.
This was fun.
Tell your dad.
Tell your dad.
As always.
He'll have a lot to say about this one.
Yeah, he's probably already seen it 100 times.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.